Journey IFC strives to create safe spaces to worship God. Know that you are welcome just as you are, regardless of religious background or lack thereof, skin color, political affiliation, sexuality, age, culture, or any other label you own or society throws on you. You are welcomed and celebrated here just as you are. So our reading today is a little different. It'll be a little more interactive with all of us. But we're going to do an activity on the golden rule. So you might have heard of the golden rule before. It's golden. And so we're passing around a piece of paper. It'll have all of this. It'll also be on the screen. But I just want to take a second to go through. If you didn't know this, the golden rule isn't just a Christian thing. It isn't specific to one culture. It actually bubbles up in a lot of cultures. It's a pretty ancient thing. And so we're going to read through some different versions of the golden rule to help us navigate this conversation on boundaries. And I figured we could popcorn, read them around out loud. So we might need to pass a mic around to do that once everyone gets a copy. Everyone have a copy now? I think so. Perfect. So I'll start us off. We'll do the normal Christianity one. So if you want to go to that first slide. So Christianity, this is the version that we get from Matthew 7. Jesus says, "In everything, do to others as you would have them do to you. For this is the law and the prophets." So just as we do this, take note of what's interesting about each of these. They'll all be similar, but there's some differences. So that's Christianity. Law and prophets. It's an interesting line to add there. So let's go to the next one. Someone read the second one from the Baha'i faith.
Baha'i faith, they not.
It needs to be in the.
Just so they can hear you on Zoom.
Baha'i faith, lay not on any soul a load that you would not wish to be laid upon you. And desire not for anyone the things you would not desire for yourself. Ooh.
Isn't that cool?
Okay.
Let's go to the next one.
Buddhism. Treat not others in ways that you yourself would find hurtful.
Harm is the focus there. Interesting.
Confucianism.
Yep.
One word which sums up the basis of all good conduct, loving kindness. Do not do to others what you do not want done to yourself.
Do not, some negatives there. Anyone want to read the next one? Thank you, Joe.
Hinduism. This is the sum of duty. Do not do to others what would cause pain if done to you.
Humanism. Don't do things you wouldn't want to have done to you.
Islam. None of you truly believes until you wish for others what you wish for yourself. That's number 13 of Imam al-Nawawi's 40 habits.
Jainism. A man should wander about treating all creatures as he himself would be treated.
Judaism.
This one has two. Only put one on the board, but read both.
What was that?
There's two of them on here. You'll just have one up here. You just keep reading. Okay.
Judaism. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. What is hateful to you, do not do to your neighbor. This is the whole Torah. All the rest is commentary.
Love that. Hillel says that. That's a good quote.
Native spirituality. We are as much alive as we keep the earth alive.
Isn't that interesting? That feels related but different, right?
Yeah.
Sikhism. I am a stranger to no one, and no one is a stranger to me. Indeed, I am a friend to all.
Taoism. Regard your neighbor's gain as your own gain, and your neighbor's loss as your own loss.
We're just going to wrap it all around here.
We're just going to wrap it all around here. But y'all have to, you can come forward. I'm kind of out here.
It may or may not.
She's at the end of the
Unitarianism. We affirm and promote respect for the independent web of all interdependent, not independent. Pay attention, people. Let's try that again. Unitarianism. We affirm and promote respect for the interdependent web of all existence, of which we are all a part. There's a lovely example of just kind of seeing what you expect to see. Right? Don't we expect to see independent rather than independent?
Freudian slip right there.
Yeah.
Good point.
And our last one from Zoroastrianism.
Thank you.
I'll say it so you don't have to.
Which I've never heard of. Have no clue.
It's an ancient, Christianity actually borrows a lot from Zoroastrianism. So.
Okay. That nature alone is good, which refrains from doing unto another whatsoever is not good for itself. Do not do unto others whatever is injurious to yourself.
Isn't that interesting how the golden rule, what we call it the golden rule, has bubbled up in all these different societies? I'm curious if any of those stick with any of you. If any of those, are there any that you're like, wow, I really liked that one, or didn't like that one, or never heard of Zoroastrianism, Deanne?
I like the native one just because it wasn't just people-centric.
Yeah.
It was the world.
Yeah, it's creation-centric, not just people-centric, in the Native American one. Yeah. Other thoughts?
Just as a person. What can we talk about? Sorry. I find it interesting, the Judaism, the second part, Hillel's commentary, because as a Christian, do unto others as you would have others do unto you is really a heavy focus on Jesus said that. That's the essence of everything. But Jesus was a Jew. And for Hillel, who's a famous rabbi, very highly respected, to say, what is hateful to you, do not do to your neighbor. This is the whole Torah. All the rest is commentary, is so indicative of how Jewish Jesus was and how much his purpose was to wake up people who had become very religious to actually do the essence of exactly like if we were doing the essence of what Judaism was when Jesus was there. But Judaism, the religion being practiced, was just as defective as Christianity is now for many of us who have grown up believing ourselves Christian. But what the bigger church seems to be doing is not what is hateful to you, do not do to your neighbor. Anyway, thank you for this.
And I think it's interesting to read through these, and I hope you'll take these home and hang them up somewhere to look at, because I think some Christians believe that we have a monopoly on what is the right or wrong behavior. We think everyone else has got it wrong, they're just trying to figure it out, but we actually have this figured out, as if we're not all really confused too. And I love that all of these show that there is some kind of thread in humanity that wants to care for others and for self. So thank you all for sharing in that. I thought this was a cool activity just to kind of read through. But as we go in, I'll talk for a bit. You can put your papers down if you want. But as I read through these, I became super fascinated in all these different perspectives and on what has become, the golden rule, as we call it. So the golden rule is also known as the rule of reciprocity, of, do unto others as done to yourself. And it's this kind of moral code, we could say, that states broadly that one should act upon others as they would like to be acted upon. And so, as we can tell, reading these different versions, there's different ways of approaching this. Native Americans kind of come from creation, you know. We can tell that they're all coming from a particular context with a different focus. The Christian perspective talks about the importance of the law and the prophets, which usually gets left out when we quote this. I thought that was interesting. Why the law and the prophets? I like that the Buddhist perspective focuses on reducing harm. Like I said, the native traditions focusing on our relationship to creation and the earth being included in this. Taoism says our gains and losses are shared. I think that's really cool. I love that one. Each are different, but they all seem to have some core truth, I guess we could say. And I think it's that how we treat others and ourselves is important. I think that's what all of these get out, that how we act upon others and how we expect to be acted upon does matter. And while Christianity adopted this along the way, and we can even see that Judaism had this as well, it's not a new rule, it's not something we made up, it's not something Jesus just figured out himself. This actually goes back thousands of years, and the earliest documented forms of the Golden Rule can be traced all the way back to ancient Egyptians over 4,000 years ago. And who's to say that there's other versions that were lost in history that don't go even further back? And so as we begin this series on boundaries, calling it drawing lines, the Soul team chose to start with the Golden Rule as our kind of starting guide. This is where we'll start. And this rule is not exhaustive by any means, but according to all of these major religions and these major worldviews, it's important that we do unto others as we would have them do to us. Do unto others as you would have done unto you. The reason we decided to start here is because when we start navigating our personal boundaries, we must know first what is good for us so that we can begin to understand what could be good for another person. And for clarification, when I say boundaries, I don't mean the lines we draw in the sand or whenever we cross into a new property or a new state or a new country. Instead, when I say boundaries, I mean the limits we personally set in our own lives around our time, our emotions, our bodies, and anything else that we choose to put a boundary around. And so if you're new to this term, boundaries, it's a way of caring for ourselves by voicing our needs and our own limitations. And while creating boundaries or drawing lines, as we are calling the series, while it sounds divisive and selfish in nature, I think it actually helps us care for others better. Brené Brown, in her book, Atlas of the Heart, actually has a section on boundaries, and she notes that the most compassionate people that she has interviewed, researched, met with, have all had very clear and defined boundaries. And our own Nathalie, who's on our Soul team, told us that in AA circles, that there's a quote that boundaries are never, boundaries are never against the other, but they're always for ourselves. So it's never against another person, it's always for ourselves. So it's not selfish. And Brené Brown also shared a quote in this section on boundaries. It's a quote by Prentice Hemphill, who's an embodiment coach, which I thought was a cool title, and a writer. And Prentice Hemphill said, "Boundaries are the distance at which I can love you and me simultaneously." Isn't that pretty? That's a wonderful way of explaining boundaries. The distance at which I can love you and me simultaneously. I love that this version of boundaries is centered in love for the self, yes, but also love for the other. It's not selfish or hateful at all, but instead it's compassionate in nature. It shows us that boundaries are a good thing. But I'll have to admit, navigating boundaries can be challenging work, right? Sometimes our boundaries are crossed, and this can lead to tension and fights. We probably had this happen in our lives already. It may mean we have to be stern at times and let people know that we have hit our limit, that we are done. You have hit my boundary. So in naming our boundaries, we must first get in touch with what our needs and limitations are. And while this may feel selfish, even the Golden Rule bases what we want others to do on what we would like done to us. So first, we have to know what we want, what we like, what works in our lives. The Golden Rule itself requires us to start with the personal before we can begin to expand that to the communal, right? We have to learn what we think is appropriate or safe or what is harmful to us before we begin to imagine what is appropriate or safe or harmful for others. And we typically learn these kind of things about boundaries in relationship with one another. And often this happens when someone steps over our boundaries. And sometimes they step over boundaries we didn't even know we had until they stepped over them. Sometimes it takes experiencing a boundary violation to know when it has been crossed. So it's this ever-evolving process of learning about ourselves and what works for us personally, and then learning how we feel about how people treat us when they treat us a certain way. It's also learning what crosses our lines and what gets to our limits, right? And this is why boundaries often change throughout our lives. They're not set always. Some are set, some we keep firm, but some change. But the idea is that we can learn how to express our limits and needs at any given point in our life, that we get to make that decision, that we get to choose for ourselves where we draw this line, hoping that others will respect this boundary when presented to them. And this is where I think the golden rule falls short. What did he say? Oh no, all these great ideas. Can I get that water, actually? I saw Vicky bring that over, and I was like, oh. So like I said, I think this is where the golden rule falls short. It's a nice idea to think that what we find okay or good or harmful is some universal truth that can be extended beyond us into the world, but we know that's not the case. We can never determine another person's boundaries for them. And this work is also hard to realize because we cannot set boundaries for others even if we'd really like to, right? Because honestly, we don't know each other's joys and each other's limitations. We only know our own. And that's what the golden rule gets at. We can only approach this from what we understand. And so I would like to suggest an update to the golden rule if we could do that. And I would say that maybe we should say, do unto others as they would like done unto them. Does anybody hear that? Do unto others as they would like have done unto them. Placing the agency back into the hands of those who are affected by the actions. Allowing for each of us to choose our own boundaries and honor them. If we're talking about boundaries are a natural thing that occur. They happen in nature all around us. And there are natural boundaries between different ecosystems, let's call them. For example, land and water. That's a pretty clear boundary that we can define when you're in one and when you're not in the other. And boundaries are an important place, right? They tell us when we are leaving a space that is comfortable or familiar for us, and when we're entering into new territory. And so this means that boundaries aren't always clearly defined. Sometimes it's water and land, sometimes it's a little blurry. Sorry. Boundaries are not like state lines. They're not like border checkpoints where people hold guns at your face, making you worry about getting into a place. Instead, these boundaries or borders in nature tend to be kind of a blurring, a mixing of two ecosystems. And these blurred boundaries between these ecosystems actually have a name. They're called ecotones. Can you say that? Ecotones? Ecotones. I'm going to say that a lot, so we'll learn it. And an example of an ecotone is how marshlands are the space between wet and dry ecosystems, or how grasslands are spaces between deserts and forests. They're those in-between spaces. And what scientists have learned about ecotones is that they tend to hold the most biodiversity in species and animals and plants of any region. This is where the most new life is occurring. So where two differing ecosystems collide comes new plants and animals, and a lot of crossover begins to happen here. When two ecosystems are required to navigate their relationship with one another, new things can arise. And much like with our own boundaries, ecotones require those creatures living within them to adapt to new life and new environments as they come, to learn what is good for them, but also to learn what is good for others. So let's play around with this idea a bit, right? If we're talking about personal boundaries, what if we were animals living in some ecosystem that we find comfortable and great? It's our boundary. Imagine we are a snow leopard high up in the icy mountaintops. So we're out there loving the cool weather. It's great. It would not make sense for us to expect the same things to keep us safe and happy for those in different climates, right? Like if we were talking to a camel in a desert region, we wouldn't need the same things, right? At least not all of the same things or in the same way. The golden rule would tell us, well, give them what you need. You know, you need a cool temperature, high elevation, those things keep you safe, right? That's what we should give them. Give to them what you want. But an evolved golden rule would say, actually, they don't need those things. You do. Instead, can we find ways of meeting their needs and your needs simultaneously, acknowledging your differences, acknowledging your personal boundaries? If we look at life as ecotones, these in-between third spaces between ecosystems, we can begin to stretch ourselves outside of what makes us comfortable. Maybe we differ in some ways as the snow leopard and the camel, but maybe we do share some needs and limitations that are maybe a little bit universal, the need for sleep and for water. And maybe we can teach the other what we need and learn from them what they need, and maybe we can learn more about our own boundaries from their boundaries. Boundaries or ecotones can be a space where we can grow and learn and create these new and wonderful things, just like what happens in these ecotones, where this new life erupts. So when we're doing this work of navigating our boundaries with ourselves or with our families, with our society, even if we're creating boundaries with our faith and with God, that's okay to do. We'll talk about that in a couple of weeks. We have to realize that we are in ecotone-like territory. We are in a place where our needs are running into the needs of others. And that requires us to learn and adapt and voice what we really need. It won't always be pretty doing this type of navigation, but good things come from boundary setting. As long as we see it like these creative ecotone-like regions where we can grow, where new things are born. This space is holy. This space is needed in our lives. And so throughout this series, we will continue to explore our boundaries with ourselves, with our families, with our society, with God. So let us be gentle with ourselves as we explore our limitations, the unexplored ecotones in our lives, those boundary regions that hold our limitations. The Golden Rule reminds us that knowing what we need and also knowing what others need is important if we want to live in a healthy relationship with one another. So let us be challenged to navigate these ecotones together as we learn to care for self and then in turn care for others. Let us be empowered to enter into these holy spaces as we establish boundaries that are healthy for us and for those we meet, so that we can love ourselves, as Prentice said in that quote, so that we can love ourselves and one another simultaneously. May it be so. Amen.
When we set boundaries, it can feel selfish. It can feel as if we are setting someone else outside. But in sharing communion, we are recognizing that each of us is a part of a larger whole. Even as there are boundaries for what a thumb is able to safely do, where the boundary for the thumb may end, the rest of the body takes on the need. We can each rest in our given space, knowing that the need will be met, not by us necessarily, individually, but by the entire body of Christ. And so I invite you to come forward to share in bread and juice, representing our sharing in the whole body. And so this table is open to all of creation, to all of us present today. There is hand sanitizer on the chair. Vicki, we did not think to have a gluten-free option. I don't know if we have any gluten-free anything anywhere, so you may have to have a pretend communion. We can get a cup and you can have wine because we just didn't think. We're looking for gluten-free, so if you're gluten-free, stay till the end. We may come up with something. Sorry about that. God will provide. After you receive your bread and juice, though, or your juice, whatever it is you get, do not return to your chair. Instead, step on, and we will form a circle around this communion table. Please come forward as you are ready to share in being one body with each other.
Wow. In a world where the golden rule used to be, do unto others before they can do unto you. Remember, that's not the way it works. Just as lines can separate, they also connect. Boundaries can separate, but they can also establish an interface where we can get together. So my challenge to you this week is maybe exist in that space in between the ecosystem or ecotone. Be there, because sometimes we are the bridge that other people travel. So be there and let those walk upon you. Go in peace. Amen.